Welcome to Ace of Pentacles, your career strategy and workplace wellness podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, and I'm so happy you're here. Join me every week as we investigate how people design and discover their way through their careers. Together, we'll explore the science of well-being at work and discover tools and strategies to help us do well and be well. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Ace of Pentacles. Today we have with us Donnacadh O'Briain, and Donnacadh is an award-winning director and now an award-winning learning and development specialist as well. An experienced designer who specifically designs learning experiences for leaders, and that's what he's recently won an award for. And so we're here chatting with him to see how we can think a little differently about the way that we do leadership training and executive development at companies. I met Donnacadh through a previous guest on the podcast, Shayna Harrison, and I was really fascinated by his work. I was really fascinated by the approach that he takes. I've been in the HR space. I've been in the organizational development space. And I personally think the way that we approach leadership training is really outdated. I think the way we approach learning in a lot of ways is outdated. And so I wanted to invite Donnacadh to talk to us about his process, his own career journey, why he chose to make the switch, what kind of led him to this moment in his own career, and then share a little bit about his process with us and how he works with leaders. So, hello, Donnacadh. How are you?
Hello. Yes, good. I'm good, thank you. It's a beautiful day here in North London. Blue skies, which is rare. It's really very pretty.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today and tell us about your journey to getting here.
Okay, well, I guess I should probably begin like maybe when I went to university rather than where I went to primary school. Although one of my primary schools was called Compton, which is just like a fun fact. So, yeah.
Perfect.
Well, I could do the straight out of Compton lyric, but I don't know. Sometimes it's my party piece. So I trained as an actor after school, which kind of came upon me quite suddenly. It wasn't in my radar at all, and then suddenly I kind of got the bug around the age of 16, and suddenly that was all I wanted to do. So I did that. I trained as an actor. I started directing as I was doing that. So I then basically from there, I didn't really do any acting. From there, I had a 20-year career directing plays. Across all kinds of places, worked on about 75, 80 productions in that 20 years as an assistant director, as a director, as an associate director, kind of across the hierarchies of the industry, and mostly in London, briefly in a little bit off Broadway, a little bit as well, but basically based in the UK and in Ireland as well, which is where I'm from. And that led me to interact a little bit with the corporate space, not very much. So in that 20 years, really just little bits of interaction here and there. Became kind of aware of leadership training, and I became aware of the use of acting or actors or role play or creativity in that space, but really only just kind of lightly aware. But enough to kind of go, well, that looks really interesting. I wonder what that's about. I should learn more about that. And then, was just too busy doing my main career to really manage to find the time and the space until just after COVID, when everything kind of changed a little bit for a lot of people through that period. And I started to look at my career in a different way. It decided to transition away from being a kind of a rehearsal room director, which is a very full on in the room, hands-on role, and to try and look around and see what else might be out there for me. And I guess then those bells, which had rung earlier, in the previous decade, started to kind of go, okay, I should go back to that. I should email that person who got me in to do that thing that time and see what they're doing and see if they're interested in some work that I'm doing. And so I started building those connections, I guess. Started tentatively exploring those connections. Yeah, and then that led to me being pulled into the very first thing I did in this space, I guess 2 or 3 years ago, was using kind of role play in a kind of a HR team training context. It was around really some quite simple things. Again, we're not going into the details of it, but that was kind of a foot in for me. Playing a relatively small role in that training, but I got to be in there for the whole thing and see what was going on, what was happening with those team members, what they were getting, maybe what felt missing, what felt flat, what was interesting, what it seemed like the work I was bringing. And that led to my first kind of project where I led, which was for DXC Luxoft, and which we did in Princeton a couple of years ago, which was for kind of the whole senior sales team across 2 days. And that was my first kind of time as the lead designer, really, of a learning experience. Really enjoyed putting that together and delivering it, and learned a lot doing it. It was really fun. So that's the kind of potted version that lands me in the training space. Not quite at leadership yet, but that was kind of what got me into the area.
Donnacadh, I shared just now about how I think the way that we approach leadership training is really outdated. I've been in rooms facilitating and designing and also learning leadership principles, strategies, practices. And it's usually like a slide deck, and it's a bunch of people sitting in like a classroom setting. And, you go over, maybe there's like a framework, maybe there's some kind of like a mnemonic or a process that you follow to give feedback or whatever. And you can almost see like everyone's kind of just checked out, right? And they're sitting there and they're just taking the information in, but you're not sure if it's landing, and you're not sure. And some people might engage and ask questions, but you're not really sure where the information's going, and you actually don't know how it's going to be practiced. And so what I love about your approach is it's actual practice. I mean, when we think about what it means to be a leader, we're putting on a costume, right? We're putting on a little bit of we're stepping into a role, and we need to learn how to play that role. And that happens through practice. It doesn't happen through theory. And so I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about, one, why do you think this approach to leadership training is needed right now? And tell us a little bit about the approach. You can address those questions in whichever one you want to prioritize.
Thank you. Yes, I would say, broadly, and I've actually, in my undergraduate degree, we looked at education in a number of different contexts. So we looked at special educational needs education, we looked at primary education, we looked at secondary. So I have been in teaching contexts in a really wide variety. And then along with my directing career, I trained actors at university, drama school actors, and I trained directors, and I still train and mentor writers at MA level at Cambridge, as where I was yesterday, actually working with them. So I've worked across a really broad span of the education system. I mean, predominantly in the third level, but I have touched on a lot of it. And, we think of that as separate, right? The education system is separate from learning and development. But of course, they're all, if something's working in education, it's probably going to work in learning and development. I mean, actually, growth mindset, which is something I'm working on right now for a project for a client about growth mindset. Carol Dweck, I think her work comes from her work with small children. That's where it comes from. And it's incredibly applicable notion through leaders. Anyway, just as a kind of a background, I guess just I'm not coming to this purely from the rehearsal room director. There's also a lot of education work kind of that is really useful in the background approaching this stuff. And some kind of grounding in pedagogy and how people learn and engage, and what learning looks like when it's really happening, and what it looks like when it's not happening, which is kind of what you were just describing. And I think I think embodiment is incredibly important. That is career in the rehearsal room. We learn how to bring a production to life by constant practice, constant trial and error, which involves a kind of a level of acceptance that it's going to take a while for it to be right. And, there's certain things you have to get very comfortable with, like failure. You've got to get very comfortable with failure, and very friendly actually with failure. And you've got to get very comfortable with practice and with repetition and with trial and error. You've got to get very comfortable with feedback, with immediate feedback, with asking for feedback, with interrogating feedback even sometimes. So the rehearsal room is a very robust place of learning. It's a very active place.
Donnacadh, what you were just talking about was being in the rehearsal room. And I think that is so important, because one thing we don't think about when we think about education or learning and development, which to me, it's all the same, right? It's adult education. We don't really think about the practice associated with it. We're like, here's a theory, and we expect people to take it and run with it. And there's some sense of empowerment about making it your own and applying your own style. But I think this concept of being in the rehearsal room, the way that you're talking about it, is so powerful. Can you tell us a little bit more about, as a director, how do you approach that? And how does that translate, your previous experience, how does that translate into the leadership work you do now?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So, well, I suppose, one of the kind of the sentences you might hear the most often from me in a rehearsal room is can we try, or let's try, or what if we, there's a lot of kind of a lot of offers, a lot of theoreticals, a lot of the whole language is around essentially exploration, is around exploring around where our gut feels like is going to be rich, and then committing to that, and then reflecting on how that was. Was it rich? Was it interesting? Did we notice something else? Did it fall flat? Did it give us the thing we thought we wanted? And as I was saying, there's this very fast moving kind of feedback loop in a rehearsal room where we're immediately in kind of interrogating what's going on. A lot of trust required to make that work. A lot of mutual respect is vital to make that work. And trust and respect, we kind of really prioritize those in that work environment. Those things are very prioritized because it doesn't work without them. Because we have to work so fast and so nimbly, they become incredibly important to safeguard, and build and then safeguard, nurture. But I think in terms of how that crosses over, yeah, I do a lot of very practical when I'm working with leaders, with groups. I will do a lot of very practical things. Write and create little kind of scenes and montages and vignettes for people to kind of watch and observe, and then kind of deconstruct and talk about and reflect on, and kind of see what stimulus come up. So there's a little bit of, so that's in some ways a classic kind of stimulus and kind of group respond. What did that do to you? What did you notice? What was interesting? Do you see yourself in that? Do you see other people in that? Does that reflect the culture of this company? Does it not? If it does, where does that exist? I do that stuff, which I think is very useful. And it's a very rich type of stimulus because it's kind of happening right there in the room. It's very powerful. It's very specifically really hard to not engage with. You've got a couple of actors there and a director, and you've got again, usually do the writing. Where our whole career is built on engaging people. So usually that happens. And then usually that rich things come from that. So it's quite reliable in the sense of as a type of stimulus. And then I will also in various ways get groups to get up and to engage. And sometimes I use a lot of scenarios where people can slip in and out of different scenarios and just explore, I guess, a kind of an innovation approach I use quite a lot, which very simple, but just that you have a situation, you have an opportunity to kind of strategize around the situation, and then you try that strategy. And I use actors for that. So let's try that strategy. Let's have this person be the other person in this situation, the staff member perhaps, or the peer, the customer. Let's trial that, and then let's watch. And then let's reflect, let's share feedback with each other. How did that go? What was interesting? What was successful? What was difficult? And then let's re-strategize and let's try that again. Or we might modify the scenario. But essentially what we're doing is we're going, there isn't one answer here. We're going to try and find layers of answers by applying ourselves, by observing, by really listening, really watching, by honestly reflecting and feeding back as a group, which is a vulnerable thing to do, but very important. There's, in a way, the way I work and where I come from, nothing happens without people being ready to take the risk of being honest and speaking to their peers. I often get people into relatively small groups to do that, as I'm sure, as you do, I'm sure as well. It's easier for people in that context. Are you taking the focus level down a little bit? But so, yeah, I'll usually take people through that process, rather than like the last thing for me, the kind of the antithesis for me would be some kind of something which says, do it like this. For me, that's the antithesis of any kind of training that makes any sense. Anything that purports to have a way which you can just do is selling you snake oil, essentially, to use an American expression.
Yes.
So for me, it's all, which is why. So I did a session recently for State Farm over here, and I called the session the practice room, which is actually something which comes from my actor training time, where I used to run a module called the practice room. But really, it was all about that. The session was all about that. How it was about practicing trial and error, reflecting, and using the knowledge in the room, using the team knowledge, the accrued team knowledge, to feed back in ways that are specific to the context that the group live in their working environment. Rather than some kind of idea that me, the facilitator coming in from outside, can come up with answers to these institutional issues, which are specific to the real details of what it is to work there, where you work. We don't know. We don't have that deep knowledge. We might go and do some interviews, go and have a look around, get a feel for the place, and that's so valuable. I love doing that whenever I get the chance. But I don't then show up and pretend I know everything about the company. I know some stuff. I know enough things to kind of engage and get involved and kind of understand what the themes are, and what the environment feels like in some ways, so I'm not way off. But the real detail and the real knowledge in the room is in the participants. So the way I work is very much about getting that information, getting that knowledge, that sharing of knowledge is really fundamental.
Yeah. What I love about this approach that you're sharing is that it feels like it's not rooted in any specific framework, which is what makes it so powerful because it sounds like it's this very multidisciplinary approach. And I think I can see how that would resonate with people because it's something fun, it's interesting, and it removes the pressure of like being in a conversation. Like with my work, a lot of the times I'll ask leaders to be like, well, I'll do the same thing that you do, where it's like, well, why don't we try this? How would you say this to someone, right? How would you give that feedback to someone? And you can tell when you remove the pressure and you help people just practice, like you said, right? Rehearse and practice. They start to feel in their body what it feels like to be in that real conversation. And once you can adjust and, get your body used to it, it just builds confidence, it builds self-compassion, and it builds compassion for other people. So I think the work that you do it's way more powerful than a simple leadership training, because I think leadership training, it's almost like it doesn't even cover it, because the way traditionally we think about it doesn't build empathy and it doesn't build compassion. It's like, here's a bunch of information, here's a little bit of practice, go do it. And I think what you're doing, seeing the actors, I'm just imagining myself as a leader in that room, seeing someone act something out and then registering, how did that feel to me in my body? Can I see myself doing that? Can I see someone else, like my least motivated person on my team? How might they react in that situation? How would they respond to what this person just said?
Yeah, and I think I think emotional engagement is really important. I mean, again, I'm not deep in the neuroscience, but I mean, I'm kind of in it enough to know that, emotionally tagged memories last a lot longer. We recall them much more frequently. We're far more likely to build action or change on emotionally tagged. So bringing emotion into the space is really important. I think what's useful in that context, if you like, let's say I've talked about some creating scenes which people watch. That's often how I'd like to. Sometimes that's how I'll start, because it's a little easier as well. You are allowed to be a little more passive. You are in the dark a little bit, so you're not exposing people right from the off. You're kind of warming the room up, warming the group up, getting people to engage. But at the same time, you are warming people up emotionally, as you described really, really beautifully. You're getting people engaged in feelings and the complexity of living moments, because it's complex. It's complex, and it's not as simple as what you say. What you say is just a small part of it, which is why these things being in 3 dimensions and live, actually there's a lot more information available in that, because actually dynamics and the body, and these are things we might not even be able to, or I mean, I've worked in this industry where it's my job to be able to verbalize what the body is doing and work with that. But for most people, we might not even notice or quite know how to describe those things. But regardless of whether we can describe them or not, we are reading them and we are feeling them and we are reacting to them and making decisions based on them. We're constantly making decisions based on body language and dynamics and what that silent information we're getting all the time. And I think by having real people in the space like that, or by bringing the body into the space in that way, it makes that more tangible. And so and then suddenly it kind of makes it impossible to reduce it to try saying this. But it's not just about what you're saying. It's a lot more than that. It's about your intention to some extent. We sometimes in business we think we can hide our intention. You can't hide your intention. Not really. Maybe a psychopath can. Not that there's any of them in business, so that's good.
No, none at all. What are you talking about?
It's you can't really hide. There are certain things about fundamental things that it's coming out through the dynamics, through your bank. And again, it's sometimes we get these gut feelings, don't we, in conversation. There's something not quite feeling right here in this conversation. I don't feel right about this deal, this conversation, this offer. I don't feel right about it. And usually that's because people are hiding things, and people don't need to hide things when their objectives are, broadly speaking, fairly okay. You know, if
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
if I'm slightly overpricing you for the car, I might not need to. Maybe I'm hiding that a little bit, but actually, I'm only slightly overpricing you. I'm going to be, I'm just trying. I'm a businessman trying to do a deal. If I'm hiding the fact that the engine's going to blow up tomorrow, then I'm having to work a lot harder with that. I'm having to really kind of
Hmm.
like there's a whole strong layer of pretense going on. Anyway, I'm not quite sure why I've got into that. Maybe it's because I'm buying a car at the moment. That's
Because
what
you're
it
buying
is.
a car.
It's
Actually,
because
you
I'm
know what
buying
I
it.
was going to say? It was because let's send this episode to your person that you're going to be buying the car from. For sure. I was actually going to say this is sometimes stuff like this happens in these conversations because, we're sharing mind space and we're just kind of like tapping into consciousness together right now. And my mind keeps going back to ask him about this. And this has nothing to do with leadership development, or maybe it does. But
Maybe.
you said earlier to use an American expression, and you said the thing about snake oil, like someone selling you snake oil. Is there an Irish equivalent of that, Donnacadh?
Is there an Irish equivalent? Yeah, maybe. If you could say that. I don't know. I mean, we have an expression, I guess, which is someone kind of bringing the blarney, which kind of means bullshit. Like
Mm,
that
yeah.
kind of. I'm getting blarney, which means you're telling me all of these stories in order to avoid telling me the thing that actually I really want to know, which is that the engine's, screwed. But I'm getting all this blarney about all this other stuff. Anyway, so I don't know. We have a few. Snake's a good one though. Snake oil. It's nice. I like it.
Yeah.
I came across it in a Donnacadh book, I think, for the first time. It's a whole snake thing in the little friend by
I
Donnacadh.
don't know anything about the background of it. I just know the saying.
Yeah,
But now my saying's going to be bringing the blarney.
yeah, the
Sounds
blarney. Yeah,
like you're bringing the blarney. I like this. Okay.
yeah. A lot of words and stories, obfuscation. Hiding stuff.
All right, Donica, I'd like to pivot back to your journey of moving from theater
Yeah.
into leadership development. What were some of the most challenging parts of that for you?
All the challenging parts. I think two things. One was about understanding how to translate my experience into that space, and the other one was about I'm trying so I don't forget the two. The other one was about dealing with your kind of managing your own naivety. So it's the first thing I think is, yeah, it was when you're kind of doing something, you spend your career doing a thing, you're doing it all the time. You don't inherently kind of stop and reflect a lot on what it is you're doing. And over the 10,000 hours or whatever, you build up a lot of instinctual ways of working. And I did start teaching directing. I did start teaching directing a little, which was incredibly useful because I had to suddenly go, wait a second, what do I do? And why do I do it like that? I had to kind of
Yeah,
figure those things out for myself. Otherwise, you're just saying, well, this is how I do it and it works fine. That's
yeah.
not terribly good education. But that was really useful for me. But anyway, but then coming into this space, I had to go through that process again of going, because it's a leader, directing is a leadership role. So I'd kind of been in a leadership role kind of pretty constantly, really, from the age of about 8. I started directing, I did my first professional production at 18, bizarrely. So I was in a leadership role really right through till I kind of stopped directing so much around the age of 40. So a lot of experience frontline, leading rooms, leading what we call companies, we call a group of actors is a company, or by extension, the company might be the group of actors and the artists, designers, etc., stage managers you're working with. So a lot of leading, a lot of getting leading wrong, obviously, hopefully more so in the first decade than the second decade, but a lot of getting it wrong, a lot of making mistakes, a lot of not helping people do their best work. And then I hope as time went on, a lot of really helping people do their best work. So there was a process of kind of unpicking what is it that I know, what do I know about leadership? What made me good as a leader at times?
Hmm.
mistakes did I make as a leader? So I had to do a lot of kind of reflecting and thinking about what it is that I have done and did, and what have I learned? What do I know in that sense? And then I guess so that's the first part of it. That was a very exciting challenge, of course. Like I loved that challenge, partly because you do actually come out of it going, well, there's quite a lot actually. I've learned quite a lot about this actually through doing it so much and trying to get better at it, because of course I think goes for anyone, but in a very direct results driven industry where you start on a Monday and then 4.5 weeks later the show opens in front of hundreds of people, like the quality of your leadership in those 4.5 weeks has a very direct relationship to how good people think you are 4.5 weeks down the line. And how good people think you are is whether or not your career goes on or not. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's very direct, it's very results driven, and it's very public. You know, you get pretty much everything you do in the professional theater gets reviewed in the national press. And living in England, coming from Ireland, these are both, small countries, so if I'm making a show in London, the national press are coming and that press is going everywhere. And, not everybody's reading it, but people who are interested are reading it. So every production is quite high stakes. So it's not there isn't much laziness around trying to get better. Trying to get better is kind of do or die in that business, as it is in lots of other businesses. So there's that. And then the second thing was about coming to terms with your own naivety. Let's say, so I've done it for whatever reason. I've worked with several quite big insurance companies in different contexts. Didn't know very much about insurance. Didn't even like to have insurance in general. Had a kind of a fairly like, if I just need to have enough money in the bank and then I'll sort my own crap out. If I lose my phone, my fault. I deserve to suffer a little bit. And what I mean? I had a kind of a slightly, I don't know, like what you'd call that type of mentality. But anyway, I certainly didn't know very much about what insurance was like on the ground floor of the people doing it and the structures. When I worked for Convex for the first time, a company here I've worked with a few times, I didn't know what reinsurance was. Like, I remember kind of going in for my first meeting and they weren't going to test me on what reinsurance was. Of course, I don't need to know that. But, going in for my first meeting, like having a podcast, an insurance podcast on my earphones as I cycled in to the city of London, just trying to be like, just getting a download on like what reinsurance is, So, but there is a certain coming to terms with your own naivety. There are things you're bringing to the table. It's important to know what those things are, which I guess is the first answer. It's important to know what those things are and what they aren't. And in the second space, it's important to come to terms with the things that you're just never going to know about. I'm never going to know really what it's like to sit on that floor and be an underwriter. I'm not going to know that. But luckily there are people that do know that in the room, which is what I was saying earlier on about leveraging the expertise in the room, the knowledge in the room. Don't ignore that. I think that's, again, this kind of bad example you referenced at the beginning, the facilitator at the front with the PowerPoint who seems to be saying through their body language and their dominance of the space, I know all the things. They don't know all the things. Nobody knows all the things. The mix in the room is where the most knowledge lives. And a lot of training is scared to access that because you suddenly lose control. And some people are not comfortable with that. For me, I've never had time to not be comfortable with that, because as a director in theater, you are running a room of actors, let's say, and their work is the work. You're facilitating the room, you're leading and setting the direction, but really the actual doing, the thing the audience is going to see in the end is what they're doing. So you're constantly handing over and control to the room, hopefully in a direction you've made really clear and in a context which is safe. But you're constantly going, okay, you guys now. And then you sit back and a lot of directing, which again is a leadership role, a lot of directing is sitting and watching, sitting and listening and witnessing. And it's a quality of listening and a quality of watching, which is incredibly important. Because actually what you'll, again, if you ever decide to shift into directing, what you'll find is the quality of the work that is happening in front of you is in relation to the quality of watching and listening that you bring as you watch it. And that sounds kind of weird. In some way, the quality of watching improves what you're watching, but it does actually. And that is tangible. I know that because some days I didn't have the energy, or maybe a certain times of the day, sometimes you're working to kind of keep that focus and attention really high, and it wanes, and actually this, you can feel when the quality of the work drops a little bit. Not purely in the kind of abstract idea that like the quality of what you're seeing drops, but the quality of your response will drop. The quality of your incisive response in the moment to what you've just seen, and how you take something and notice it and bring all of our attention to it, and then offer a perspective on it. Like that stuff is really detailed work, and it requires a lot of energy, and it's boring stuff like eating well and sleeping well is incredibly important in that work, because your focus, your energy is so important in leadership, what you're bringing to the room, the dynamism that you want to bring to the room, to kind of, to feel like you're setting the bar in that way. But yeah, I've kind of gone around a few different bits and pieces, I think.
No, I think that was beautiful. It was a great way to describe what you mean by getting comfortable with your own naivete. And when you shared that, what came up for me was that's exactly what I'm doing when I'm teaching, right? That's exactly what I'm doing when I'm coaching a team. That's exactly what I'm doing when I'm in a classroom or I'm training, right? And I think the most powerful educational experiences are ones that inspire you to actually think. It's not just giving you information, because the way you speak about being a director, and I think you said it sounds weird, but the quality of what you're seeing actually increases or gets better as you watch it. And I agree with that, because a lot of when I teach, so I teach psychology, and a lot of my courses are very discussion focused. And so I'll be in the front of a classroom, but I'll throw out a question. And what the whole class then comes up with, and at first it might be a little uncomfortable because students are so trained to be like, oh my gosh, I have to have the right answer. And I just throw out a question, and then they see the process. They get to witness this process of where no one has the answer. And that's the truth. No one ever has any answers. We have to dig into our own wisdom to find out, how does this question relate? How do we relate to this question? And how are we relating to this moment? And I think the best kind of teaching happens when you're able to lean into that. And I think what I'm hearing you say is the best kind of directing happens when you're able to lean into that. And I think the best kind of leading happens when you're able to lead into that too. I think a lot of the times we get promoted to a leadership role. And I always found that a little bit of a funny statement. Like, you're being promoted to be a leader, and now all of a sudden there's all this pressure, and you're responsible for these people. And so, like, leadership, traditionally, we've been taught or told, is very action oriented. And I actually don't think leadership is action oriented. I think leadership is about sitting back and listening and observing and learning and directing.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think the combination is really important. Actually, the combination is important, and because there is a place for action, there is a place for dynamism. If that's dominating, then you can have a very cowed team. You can have a subdued team. Leaders can dominate the space in an unhelpful way. You definitely can do that, and you then get that situation where leaders end up saying, I just can't get my team to do the stuff. They just can't do it. I'm having to do everything myself. Well, sometimes that's because what you're saying with your body language and your energy and your dynamic is, I'm the best at everything. And if what you're saying is, I'm the best at all of these things, then you're less likely to have an empowered team who kind of show you what they can do. So that's an important one. I think it's, again, it's the experience helps you to know when to hand the power over and when to kind of pull it back. And the pulling it back doesn't have to be, wait a second, you're not doing it right, let me pull the power back. It's the give and take of going, you guys have run with this, and now I'm going to take the pressure back to myself for a moment. I'm going to offer these assessments from my position of strategic experience, my strategic role, my whatever, my wisdom, my deeper knowledge of some things, which a leader will have. I'm going to make those reflections, and I'm going to hand it back, and now I'm going to wait, or I'm going to watch, I'm going to listen, or I'm going to respect. Again, there's a give and take of it, and knowing when to step in and kind of pull kind of bring your status back up, knowing when
Yeah.
to dominate the space and when to vacate the space so that other people can move into that space. Those are all really, really important skills that and the thing is, and sometimes the learning and the education sector doesn't like to say this, but the truth is that comes from experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of MAs out there, MBAs out there that kind of tell you that they'll teach you how to do certain things
Hmm.
they can't teach you how to do. You have to
Yeah.
learn them through doing the thing and getting better at it over time. You know, this
Yeah.
there sometimes there's a sales aspect, you know, to L&D and education, where it can be convenient to give the impression that you can learn a certain thing, you can book learn certain
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
that you just can't book learn. And I think there's a little bit of the snake oil in that sometimes, because you know education is a competitive landscape and it is a product that's being sold sometimes. But it's important to, you know, for us to sit confidently in the knowledge that we learn by doing. We've always, as a species, it's our great success. We've always
Hmm.
learned by doing. We've got an incredible processor, and that's how it works. And of course, often education and learning and development is experiential, and you are learning by doing on the MA or BA or MBA or whatever. You are learning by doing. That is, I would say, you know, that is again, without being in the specifics of which type of which, but broadly speaking, if you've got the students doing and actively
Hmm.
engaging, and not just in theory but in practice, then you're going to have a deeper quality of engagement. And yeah, and certainly the work I'm doing in L&D, it's I mean, I love standing in front of people and talking. I'm super
Mm.
comfortable with that. I love doing it. I like making jokes and being funny, and I like explaining things, but
Yeah.
I don't do much of that when I'm working and I'm running an L&D session. I don't do much of that. I deprive myself of it because I
Mm.
know that that is not the best quality of learning. The best quality, the best use of our time is more engaged. It has to be much more engaged than just people listening to me talk.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder how you can bring in some of that fills your own cup into these leadership trainings that you do. Because I actually think when groups gather, for shared purpose or specifically for learning, my philosophy is connection before content. And so making sure that you're able to connect with the people who have trusted you to hold that space to facilitate this process of learning. And I think you tell great jokes, and I think you're very funny, and I think your leadership trainings would be so cool if you were able to crack some jokes.
I mean, I do bring quite a lot of energy to things,
Yeah.
whether that's covering stuff or or it's some kind of, you know, natural Irish dynamism. I don't know, but yeah, I bring a lot of energy, and I like to energize a room.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I guess that comes from my background, I suppose. But also, it's useful. And again, I've been
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
been in a whole bunch of trainings now, and it makes a difference. You know, if you can get people smiling, if you can get people responding, even, you know, ideally it becomes a conversation quite quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I mean, every now and again, look, I with the training I did in Princeton a couple of years ago, in that kind of when I mentioned kind of early days for me in this sector. Yeah, I told a story as part of the
Mm.
first 15 minutes. I told a story which I had made up, which I'd written based on a kind of another story. And it
Uh-huh.
was, you know, and it set a series of themes. It set out a series
Yeah.
of things, which you might often do with a PowerPoint with some bullet points, right? But I set out the series of themes for the 2 days in that story, and then, you know, we constantly kind of it was referred back to through the kind of the
Yeah.
thread of the session. So that's me kind of, you know, using myself there. There are certain things I can bring because of my background that not every facilitator is going to be comfortable doing or might be able to do with as much kind of confidence, I suppose. So yeah, sometimes I will kind of lean into that if I think it's going to be useful. But I do a lot of kind of going, okay, well, so, you know, a lot of the kind of the points you're trying to hit are the same. Like this thing I'm building for next week, which we're going to be delivering in Budapest, for a big beer company. It's their kind of 100 leaders gathering for an annual session. And one of the ways I've gone about designing that is to say, okay, so instead of us introducing the themes as a series of bullet points and kind of going through them all one at a time, as a facilitator speaking at the front on the stage, we're gonna embed all of those themes in a series of little short scenes and little vignettes. I've got 3 actors and we've written these scenes, and we kind of they came out of the themes, and the moments came out of interviews with people from the company, and obviously working with the head of people to kind of just to narrow those down into what the focus is of this conference. But so really, we're kind of setting the tone. We're setting the agenda of the 3 or 4 hours, the 3.5 hour session, setting the themes through a hope a more immediate, more engaged, more emotionally grounded process, which is going to stimulate people in a more direct way, where they will see themselves reflected. I mean, some of these scenes are probably going to be borderline, kind of slightly affronting for some people. Some of the little moments we're showing in these little scenes, because we're in a sense that the conference is about where are we going wrong, where are we getting in our way, where are we, it's about this theme, broadly growth mindset, where is the fixed mindset manifesting, how is it manifesting, what does it look like? So part of the job of this introduction for me is to try and write those little moments where what does a block look like? How do those things actually manifest in day to day, in the moment, not as a theory.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to kind of go, well, this is what a fixed mindset is. Obviously that's bad. Let's not do that. But like, the truth is it's there all the time. So what is it actually, how do you identify it? How do you see it? So, but anyway, some people will be affronted by some of it because they'll be like, oh, I sometimes feel like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm right.
Yeah.
And they may be right, but that's going to be a conversation that they then go into. The idea is to stimulate the group to think. I've done this. I remember doing something similar before, which was about feedback and difficult conversations that leaders have to have, and it was about they watched this little series of scenes, and this one guy just said, yeah, it was really like the first scene you did with the guy who said that. I did that yesterday, and I feel pretty shit about that right now.
Oh.
And that was it was a really powerful moment.
Yeah.
That somebody kind of went, I'm that guy. I am that guy sometimes. And I'm going to be brave enough in this room of 13 of my peers, 15 of my peers, just to say that, because let's be honest, shall we? Let's be honest about where we're at.
Yeah. I think some of the most powerful moments of growth and transformation, especially when it comes to leading, are those moments when you're able to say, yeah, I did this. It wasn't my best moment. And then you can turn it around and go, okay, like, now how do we do this differently next time? I actually think with regards to your training, maybe not for next week because it's so soon, but growth mindset is a great way to approach that. I wonder if you've had a chance to look at Jonathan Adler's work on narrative psychology. I'll send you that. I'll send you a link on that.
The
But
name is
Jonathan
familiar.
Adler,
I haven't read it properly yet.
I'm sure you know him because he was in I think he was also a theater director. He was in, I don't know his background, but he was in theater, I think, and ended up studying narrative psychology. And he talks about contamination sequences, redemption sequences, how different stories, basically, the way we tell a story of our lives determines kind of how we then approach the next phase of our lives. It's really powerful stuff.
Funny. It's funny you should say that, because my TEDx talk last year was kind of on that subject. Trademark. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, again, it's just on. It was a little piece about about how the stories we choose to tell about ourselves impact not only how other people see us, but how we see ourselves. And just that we have control. We do actually have agency over the stories we tell about ourselves, and therefore we do have agency on how we see ourselves. It's not an easy or effortless agency take, but it is one that we do have. And as a kind of somebody who comes from story, I was just bringing that little lens, which it really is kind of about, psychology really, and kind of how we live and how we see ourselves, but coming from as a student of story. But anyway, it sounds like Mr. Adler have a lot in common in terms of, I'd love to read that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Donica, I want to wrap us up. Maybe I'll invite you back to talk about stories and narrative psychology because that's one of my favorite topics. And it seems like you know quite a bit about it. What have been some of the most rewarding moments of this transition for you?
So just to give a really concrete example, I had this little idea ahead of one of the trainings that I ran, that this idea, that all the expertise is in the room that I've mentioned several times. So kind of, it's like, okay, well, if I'm saying that, if I believe that, then let's make sure that actually happens in the session. So I created this very simple little exercise where, and I told them this on the first morning of the 2 days, that over the course of the next day and a half, each of them was going to deliver a 3-minute masterclass on how they go about on some aspect of what they do. And it was a little risky offer. I'd not met the team before. Obviously, I'd run it by their boss, who was happy, thought it would be a good idea, but it was hugely satisfying because, of course, all I did was gave them the prompt and created the space. That's all I did. And it was so enriching. And they impressed each other. They really impressed each other. And some of these people didn't know each other. Some of them worked, all across the US, different territories. There'd been a merger. So some of them had come
Hmm.
from different companies. Some of them had been there for 25 years. Some were really quite new. Um, and they impressed each other, and they learned things about each other, and they took a risk in front of each other. And just the rewards to the group of that little exercise. And we did it kind of like 3 at a time over, day and a half. It wasn't just like all in one go, bang, bang, bang. It was like spread out. 3 minutes isn't that long, but it's long enough that you have to, really think about it, and it's risky enough. But yeah, it did great things for the group. And it did also share knowledge. There was, which was its other kind of, its more obvious intended purpose. That also did happen. People learned from each other, and they were able to kind of go, oh, he knows a lot about that. I need to follow that up with him. And so that was hugely rich. That was, as I say, putting my money where my mouth is in terms of, saying the expertise is in the room and going, well, in that case, let's make damn sure that expertise is accessed in the next day and a half. Because how often is this team going to get together? How often are
Yeah.
they going to have this opportunity? And if I do all the talking, they're going to learn less. So
Yeah.
let's make that happen. So
Yeah.
that was a proud moment. It felt like a risk, a facilitation risk. Um, you kind of like, am I going to get pushback? Or is there going to be people kind of going, I don't want to do that, or
Hmm.
take these little risks. Yeah, that was one that comes to mind. I think
Nice.
also, so the thing which so the award, the recent award,
Yes. Tell us
the
about that.
the
Yeah.
best external learning solution
Hmm.
learning awards,
Yeah.
the least charismatic awards title I've had, but nevertheless, very important. External learning solutions
Hmm.
are important.
Hmm.
I think I did have the woman that runs the company I was working for was like, we don't make solutions. What is this? What is this category? We don't make solutions. Anyway, but yeah, I guess with that, so that was a highly theatrical piece of work. Kind of big budget. The entire staff of the company experienced this experience. It was a
Hmm.
90-minute kind of theatrical experience, 30 at a time over the course of 2.5 weeks. Like the whole company, there's 500 kind of full-time staff in this insurance company. All went through it. And we spent a week kind of rehearsing and preparing it. I'd spent, months, over a period of months writing it and preparing it. And prior to that, interviewing people from the company again, just to get a sense of the company and the lay of the land and learn as much as I could about what was going on there. Do McKinseying, a little amateur McKinseying. And yeah, I guess I was proud of that piece, partly because it was such a risk for everybody, and we really worked hard on it to deliver something exceptional and special, and like just something that people had never seen before. And then I guess, to be really specific, it was seeing the level of emotional engagement that people were having in this little half day of their working life. So I guess, apart from the kind of the data, the kind of the scores and stuff, which were great. People really, spoke highly of it. But just watching people, because I was there for all the performances of it. I actually was, and I was one of the facilitators in the debrief as well. But just actually watching people watch it, watching people take part and engage and take risks and put themselves out there during the piece, without going into how the piece worked just now. I haven't got time, but
Hmm.
But I was proud of, again, of creating that space. The same thing, actually. I was proud of creating a space where people could step forward and engage. And the way the space was created and the kind of integrity of the space meant that they got a lot back from engaging, which is what you want to try and do, I think, as a trainer, as an educator.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Donnacadh, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank
Just to
you.
wrap us up, how can our audience find you and how can they work with you?
I live at 1A Goodwin Court. Don't come to.
How about I just drop your LinkedIn?
Yeah, you can find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. That is the most reliable. That's the most reliable avenue. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I'm really glad that you cracked a joke finally.
Yay! Thank you. Just there at the end. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you. And thank you
Thank
for
you.
doing
Thank
what
you
you
so much.
do. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
thank you for also creating a space. It's been really fun.
Absolutely.